I'm Dr. Ramakrishna. I'm a senior consultant gastroenterologist at the SIMS Hospital in Chennai. And I was formerly head of gastroenterology at the Christian Medical College, Vellore, and have been editor-in-chief of 2 journals. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how to plan a research paper in endoscopy. And the fact that you're attending the session indicates to me that you're probably interested in research and in publishing. So here are a few tips to help you along. During this talk, I will just outline the types of research that are possible. I'll tell you a little bit about research methods and tell you what the requisites of a good research project or paper are. So basically, when we look at research, you can say it is primary or secondary. Primary means you're generating or somebody is generating the data for you, one of your people. And in primary research, there can be preclinical research, which is industrial R&D, where you can develop new instrumentation. I'm talking about in the context of endoscopy, where you might develop new instrumentation, might be new instruments or accessories or whatever, and then validate these using, for the most case, animal models. So that's one form of research and development. What most of us end up doing is clinical research, which also is primary. We generate the data, and this can be experimental. You can actually do an experiment in which you do clinical trials. You randomize people to interventions, or maybe observational, and there are a number of observational designs which I'll talk about a bit later. The second form of research is secondary research, which is that you take data which is publicly available and then try and make sense of it in the larger context. Now, let me talk a little bit about industry-related research and development. I know that most of us are not going to go through this, but this is certainly available. So basically, people that make endoscopes and other scientists are interested in developing or refining instruments and accessories. So it is possible to link up with them and try and work with them and try and guide them. And many successful endoscopists have expanded on this model. For instance, Dr. Mahesh Goenka or Dr. Shyam Varadarajan. So preclinical validation can also be done in animal models. So there are several aspects where people can get involved, and this would be in product design. Once you go beyond design, then there's preclinical development, which is really very necessary because all such instruments or accessories are regulated in our country by the Drug Controller General. So after preclinical development comes 2 pathways. One is regulatory trials, which are actually undertaken by physicians or endoscopists. And side by side, there is commercialization and marketing, for which there's a separate team. And these 2 can proceed side by side. Once it goes beyond this, there is post-market research. Now, what I want to just let you know is that this whole process can take something like 25 years. And even with non-endoscopic products or with anything else, even with medication, this is a very long process. It has to go through a whole lot of hurdles. So the next form of research are the case reports. So case reports can document a novel technique, a novel treatment approach, or a novel finding. Now, it is very important to document this properly. Most importantly, being endoscopists, usually people forget that you need to get an ethical view on this before imparting or using a new treatment. Now, particularly now, when the entire world is sensitized to ethics, if you do not take ethical permissions in advance before starting a new treatment, you could find yourself in trouble. We all know, for instance, that the first oral approach to appendicectomy was done in India in 2003. Unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, this paper was never published. It's an outstanding leap forward. But somewhere along the way, probably one of these issues, which is maybe getting the ethics permissions in advance, ensuring that everything was okay, perhaps that didn't go through, and that is one reason why it was not published. Now, as I said, the next kind of research, or the one that most of us do, is to do clinical research. And here again, it may be experimental, as in clinical trials, or observational. Now, clinical trials are actually very difficult from an endoscopic point of view, because very often what you're comparing is endoscopy, let us say, with surgery or with a different kind of non-surgical treatment. For instance, you might want to compare POEM with laparoscopic Heller's myotomy, which are the two main competitors in this space for treatment. Now, to organize a clinical trial comparing laparoscopic Heller's myotomy and POEM is extremely difficult. On the other hand, you can get that same information through different ways, through statistical manipulations, using observational study designs. So you can do a case series, or you could do a case control study where each case you may have one or more controls who have received a different kind of treatment or a different kind of intervention. You may do a cross-sectional study. For instance, if your objective is to see whether early endoscopy benefits a person with upper GI bleeding in the long term, whether it reduces mortality, whether it reduces hospital stays, etc. The ideal thing would be to do a clinical trial where you randomize them to early endoscopy versus scheduled endoscopy. On the other hand, this may not often be possible, so you could do a cross-sectional study design, and this in fact has been done many times. There are different other kinds of studies which you can do, like surveillance studies. You can establish registries, or you can do ecological studies, like you can look to see what is the incidence of infections following side viewing duodenoscopy or ERCP, using different scopes, using different parameters, using different interventions. Now, in any of the studies, what is very important is to research the background. In fact, in one of the committees which I used to sit, the chairperson used to insist that every project which came in should have had a meta-analysis or systematic review of the literature, because he says without that, the person who is doing the research doesn't really know what he is doing. He's just looking at it with a narrow focus. So the first thing is to do a systematic review of the literature. Nowadays, you know that all the literature is available to most of us through electronic means. Once you've done this, what you want to know is, are there any gaps in knowledge? Is there a gap in knowledge, or is there a gap in clinical practice which you're trying to address? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? It's because you're trying to refine something, which is the way forward, which is the way man has gone forward, trying to constantly refine what he is doing. So identify the gap and say what it is that you're trying to address. Something which is very important in any research project or research paper is clarity. So express the research question or aim clearly. So very often, as an editor of a journal, what I find when reviewing papers is that people do not clearly express their research question. They know they want to do something, they've done it, but they're not able to express this clearly. The second thing is also to be very clear about the methodology. Just remember that clarity and simplicity are the most important attributes of any good research. Something which is very useful when you start research is to discuss with others. Now, we have a viewpoint, we keep on thinking about it, but there are other people with other kinds of views. They may be professional colleagues, they may be non-specialist doctors, they may be non-gastroenterologists. Try and talk to a cardiologist about an endoscopic intervention, he may give you a different viewpoint. I found that talking to nurses and endoscopy technicians is very useful because they have practical points to emphasize. You need to talk to a layperson because finally the layperson is looking at this and saying, what is this guy doing? So if you can, I mean, it might be your wife, it might be your brother or sister, it might be somebody else, you know, you can talk about it. And finally, you need to talk to statisticians and understand what kind of statistics you need or what kind of power you need for the study. So discussion adds greatly to the clarity and to relevance. When you're doing research, it's also important to understand whether it is feasible. For instance, if you take a very rare condition, you're hardly going to see patients. So pick a condition with a high caseload. And this is typical for any research. Avoid very stringent inclusion and exclusion criteria, because if you have very stringent criteria, your applicability or the generalizability of your findings is poor. You will have to have something which is applicable more broadly so that it can be used widely. Finally, when you choose an outcome variable, choose a variable which occurs fairly often. If you're looking for something very rare, an outcome variable, then you will have to have a large sample size. What is an outcome variable? This is really what you're trying to understand. The outcome should be clinically relevant. For instance, if you're looking at the effect of early endoscopic intervention on upper GI bleed, the most clinically relevant variable is mortality. Then it might be numbers of units of blood transfused, need for surgery, length of hospital stay, and so on. So generally, the principle in any research is to have one major outcome, which is called the primary outcome. The rest, you take it as secondary outcomes because they are secondary to the first time outcome. So the primary outcome should be relatively common, it should be simple to measure, and it should be clinically relevant. Statistical considerations are very important when you do research. So you have to calculate the sample size in advance. You look at the literature. If the data is not available in the literature, you try and get an idea of how frequent a problem is by talking to colleagues, getting opinions. Plan your analysis method in advance. And then look to see whether you will use categorical variables or continuous variables. For instance, let's just simply, you could look at death, which is a categorical variable. Either the person is alive or the person is dead. It's a categorical variable. Or you might look at hospital stay, which is a continuous variable because person may stay in hospital for 10 days, person may stay in hospital for 2 months. And then will you compare subgroups? If you're going to do subgroup analysis, you're going to need a larger sample eventually. Now, ethical considerations are very important. I already talked a little bit about them. Now, institutional ethical committees can be very stringent. Our particular IEC has 2 lawyers who are fairly proactive, and they will try and identify flaws in what we are saying. So they are very stringent, and that is very rightly so. So take time to prepare a dossier for the IEC, allow sufficient time for the IEC process, allow time for resubmission because they're going to ask you to come back and change things. Is it going to be a clinical trial or an observational study? The two have 2 different implications. Clinical trial, your liability is much more. Who will pay for the study? This is a question that our lawyer always has. Who will pay for injuries resulting from the study? Our chairperson and our lawyers always ask for this. Do we have a plan for research-related injury? And who's going to pay for it? So you have to take trials insurance. So these are things that you need to think well in advance. Just a brief word about secondary research. This is also very important because you can use other people's research to try and make sense and answer questions which are of clinical importance. Of course, a narrative review is the simplest way. You just take together a number of papers, put together all the details, and review it. It's the simplest research. It is probably good for somebody who's just surveying the landscape. A systematic review actually tries and gets all the literature on a particular subject from the literature and tries to see what fits certain criteria and then use that literature to review. The third is, of course, the meta-analysis. You combine data from other people's papers. If they haven't got it in their printed version of the paper, you can write to them and get the original data and try and combine the data, get a large analysis. So just to sum up, these criteria which I've talked about, they go under the acronym of the FINER criteria. F is for feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. So with that, I will really stop and just to exhort you, this Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so I'll urge all of you to start taking that step today. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful to organizers for giving me this opportunity. You have just heard a talk on how to plan a good research paper in endoscopy. I will take this story forward and introduce you to what happens to your paper in the editorial offices. Once the paper is submitted to a journal, it is subjected to editorial and peer review process. I will talk about this a little more a little later. But the reviewers scrutinize the paper and generate some comments and suggestions on your paper. On basis of these comments, a decision is taken and the decision is communicated to you. If you have been asked to make some alterations that are possible, you will do it and resubmit it into this cycle again, till the paper is approved or otherwise. Once it is approved, it goes to a different department for copywriting and production. Now let us see what is the editorial review. It is essentially a quality control mechanism by which the experts evaluate the scholarly work you have done and ensure the high standard of published science. The paper is also reviewed here by peer or contemporary specialists to judge its standard. However, the peer reviewers do not make the decision to accept or reject the paper. At the most, they recommend a decision. At peer-reviewed journals, decision-making authority rests solely with the journal editors or the journal's editorial board. Editorial review process consists of 3 stages. Stage 1 is screening. Here, an initial screening is done by the editor for the suitability for the journal. Does it meet the journal's aim and focus? Second stage is the peer review. Here, the papers are scrutinized by experts in the field, and they look at the scientific and technical content of the paper. And the last stage is editor's decision. Editor decides does it need changes or will it interest the scientific audience, and then accepts or rejects the paper. You may ask, what is the need for all this rigmarole? The answer is quality control. Approximately 3 million manuscripts are submitted to journals every year. Given the large volume of manuscript submissions, more and more journals follow a policy of screening papers before sending them for full peer review. During the initial screening, journal editors mainly check the following. Does the manuscript fit the journal's scope and the aim, and will it be of interest to its readership? Is the manuscript of minimal acceptable quality? Is the content and writing good enough for reviewing? Is the manuscript compliant with the journal's instructions for authors or not? There are several benefits of such initial screening by the editors. If the manuscript clearly lies outside the scope of the journal, then a rapid rejection is in order. For example, if the journal name is viral hepatitis and the paper received deals with the complications of cirrhosis, it will be rapidly rejected. It allows authors also to quickly find and submit their manuscript to another suitable journal. And lastly, initial screening helps save the peer reviewer's time and effort in evaluating a paper which will finally not be published in the journal. Here a quick tip for the authors. Please get your covering letter right. The covering letter should convince the editor that paper is what the journal wants and is novel, interesting, and innovative. And in the covering letter, please highlight the significance and strength of your research and outline the reason why this manuscript is good fit for the journal. You may find it interesting to know that currently journal editors reject 6 to 60% of submitted manuscripts without a peer review in the initial screening. One study has shown that over 21% of submissions are rejected during the initial screening by journal editors across all disciplines. Now let's talk a little bit about peer review. Peer reviewers are experts in the field in which the paper belongs. 2 to 6 peer reviewers are chosen for the process for each manuscript. The journal builds a pool of peer reviewers that have good track record of producing high quality reviews. Sometimes editors may scan bibliography to identify a potential reviewer, even may request the researchers they meet at a conference. Reviewers are often asked willingness to review before they are assigned the job of peer review. Many journals often ask the authors to suggest their preferred and non-preferred reviewers. Studies have shown that author-recommended reviewers are more likely to suggest acceptance of the paper rather than rejection. Therefore, for editors, selection of reviewers with sufficient expertise to do justice independently is very important. In some highly technical niche subject areas, enough reviewers may not be readily available and therefore it takes much longer to review. The process of peer review can be a single blind, double blind, or open peer review process. For example, the reviewers may not be told who the authors are, or the authors may not be told who the reviewers are, and both ways they can be informed who the authors and reviewers are. The process is completed once all reviewers give their detailed comments and recommendations. Usually a time of 2 to 3 weeks is given, but cannot enforce deadline and time taken by the reviewer. A detailed discussion on the peer review process will be outside the scope of this talk, but very briefly I can mention that a reviewer usually first initially scans the paper to see what is the format, what are the major flaws, what are the reference styles, completeness, whether the idea is new or not. Then he reads the paper thoroughly, section by section, to find out, is the introduction relevant and crisp? Is the aim clear? Material and methods and results are to be assessed just as one assesses in the journal club for internal and external validity. Whether the discussion is relevant and to the point or not, whether the conclusions are based on results and consistent with the aims or not, how does it compare with other papers on the subject, whether the images, graphs and tables submitted by the author are of good quality and there is no duplication, whether the references are relevant, accurate, adequate and up to date. Then he carries out a plagiarism check to find out whether it has been a cut and paste from the literature somewhere. And then he writes down all the concerns about the content, language, grammar and components in details. Final recommendations come in the 4 forms. That is, accept, that means the journal is willing to publish the paper in its present form. Second is accept with minor revisions, which is a conditional acceptance and means that journal will publish provided the author makes certain corrections as advised by the reviewers. Third is reject with opportunity to revise. That means it's a conditional rejection. Currently, The journal is not willing to publish this paper in the present form, but will reconsider its decision to publish, provided the author makes certain corrections as advised by the reviewers. And the last one is reject. That means the journal has not found the paper suitable for publication even if major changes are made. These are the statistics from one journal to give you an idea how frequently these four decisions are taken. Directly accept is a rare decision. Accept with minor changes is a happy outcome because the journal has accepted the article with some minor changes. Reject with opportunity to revise requires major changes to be done in the paper, and one has to carefully answer all the queries and suggestions given by the reviewers. And finally, about 1/4 to half the papers submitted to the journal are rejected, and in that case, the author has to search for another journal to submit the paper in a revised form. Editor in his mind classifies the manuscript into three groups. First type is the paper with excellent quality work that will make a contribution to science, and in this case, the editor will go all out to help the author to make the improvements so that the paper will be published. Second are the type of papers with poor quality work that make no contribution to science, and here the editor would not like to waste any time on it. And third are in between, that is satisfactory work that may make a contribution, and here the editors would like to give the opportunity to authors to improve as per the reviewer's suggestions. You may like to ask, are the decision of reviewers and editors unanimous? Here the policy of various journals varies. Some journals will publish only if all the reviewers have agreed, while others have more liberal policy. It is common for peer reviewers to give conflicting opinions, and unanimity is actually rare. In case of conflicting opinion, options are limited for the editor. Either editor himself can decide or he can take an opinion of a third reviewer or a new reviewer. Aim of the review is also to guide the authors to improve the quality of paper. Sometimes papers get rejected even if the acceptance has been recommended by the peer reviewers. This is because the editor tries to decide, is it what the journal is looking for? Have we published similar paper recently? Will it interest my readers? Will it draw citations to the journals or not? Is it novel or innovative? And so on. If these questions are in negative, often the paper will be rejected. A Nature editorial some time back had written, the primary purpose of the review is to provide the editors with information needed to reach a decision. The review should also instruct the authors on how they can strengthen their paper to the point where it may become acceptable. I would like to conclude by saying that because of a large number of submissions, top-tier journals are often forced to reject even high-quality manuscripts for various reasons like lack of fit with the journal's editorial focus. While reviewers and editors easily agree on what is clearly not acceptable for publication, deciding what is worthy of publication is a tougher challenge. And finally, journal editors make the decision to accept or reject papers based on their own opinion of the paper's publication worthiness and the reviewer's comments. Thank you very much for patient listening.
Good afternoon, everybody. I must thank the organizers for keeping the topic of scientific publication as one of the issues being discussed during the midterm meeting of SGI. We all know that the quality of work in the field of GI endoscopy being done in India is no less than anywhere in the world. However, the publication in this field are still sparse, and there are only a few centers, I can count them on fingers, which report their work regularly. So it's an apt topic for a meeting like this. The topic given to me is to discuss the reasons for rejection of a manuscript. But before I do that, let's see as to why do we need to publish. I think it is our duty to ourselves to improve your career, self-esteem, ambition, and to create a legacy. Your duty to your colleagues, staff, students, and collaborators, your institutions, funders, and patients, with an aim ultimately of increasing the scientific knowledge. It was Miller who said in 1993, and I repeat, if the work was not published, it was not done. I think if you want to pursue an academic career, which most of us want to do, then you must publish. Otherwise, your academic career is perished. However, I must point out that it's the quality of work which is important and not the quantity. It's not important how many numbers of papers you've published, but what's the quality of these papers. This is a situation where sometimes less is better than more. Less is fine so far as the quality is good. I think nothing can make you happy than to receive a letter from a reputed journal. Thank you for submitting your article to endoscopy, which I have pleasure in accepting for publication in the original article. Well done and many congratulations on an excellent paper. However, the responses may be variable. If it is accepted, you are happy. It may ask for a minor revision. It may ask for a major revision, and the article may be rejected. So you should be prepared. As a result, you may be very, very happy or very, very sad and angry. Even an emerging journal like ours, Journal of Digestive Endoscopy, which is the official journal of Society of GI Endoscopy India, and we get only a modest number of submissions, we reject almost 50%, some before review and some after review. Only 50% are accepted. Some of the good journals with high impact, this figure for rejection can be as high as 90 to 95%. Now, when you get a rejection, initially there's a denial. Why me? How can I have a rejection? Then there is anger towards the editor. One may bargain, and I have done that on one or two occasions, and it's useless to bargain for publication after it's been rejected. You may be depressed, but finally you accept the rejection. Now, considering the various types of publication, the chance of rejection is highest for the case reports. It's moderate if they are reviews, but these should be ideally with invitation only. The best chance of publication with original articles, that's the way to go. Some of the journals accept videos, and you may choose appropriate journal for submitting your videos. In respect to the original articles, the best article to be published with least rejection is randomized controlled trials involving, particularly if it involves multi-centers. It is good if it's a prospective, well-designed study. Most of the articles which are retrospective are often rejected by good journals, except when they are unique. I must emphasize that writing an article is like telling a story. Tell them your story. And this has been, I would quote from a Native American, that those who tell the stories actually rule the world. And this is true for scientific publication also. Coming to the component of the manuscript, abstract is most important. It must give you a good summary as an editor. The abstract should be concise, but should convey the message in the article. And most importantly, don't be dogmatic or a conclusion. Only conclude what your results can show. Coming to the introduction, I often get articles where the introduction is very long. It's like a thesis. It's not acceptable. You should give a background, which should include a brief literature review, significance of the issue being considered in the manuscript, given hypothesis or a question with brief synopsis of the previous results. There must be some novelty in your study. Material method should be concise yet complete. There should be a proper study design. Study population should be well defined. Data collection should be descriptive. If there are laboratory methods, they should be mentioned clearly. And of course, statistical analysis is very, very important. Results should again be like building a story. Use subheadings. 1, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and so on. Use figures as guides. Do use proper legends and proper figures, but don't be repetitive. The result should not be both in figures as well as in the description. About the discussion, very important. There should be 3 components of discussion. First should be synopsis of results with some novelty. Second should be place of your results in perspective to the literature. How has the work added to the literature? How has the work shed new insights? And finally, bring everything together. How has the work led to a new model? Very important to mention the limitations of your study rather than the reviewer or the editorial board pointing out the limitations. It's best to mention your limitations in your discussion itself. And finally conclude a realistic conclusion with future impact and directions, if any. The common mistakes which should be avoided, that is, there should be a thorough literature search prior to embarking on a study. Before you start the study, ensure that all variables which will be required in the statistics are captured in the CRF. You must consult a statistician before you start the study. Most of the time, we consult the statistician after we have completed the study. It's a good idea to have an internal peer review prior to submission. This is for the youngsters. Never make up your data. The editorial board usually is clever enough. There will be mismatch between your results, discussion, and your tables, and this is likely to result in instantaneous rejection. As I said, you involve the statistician from the beginning. He must help you in defining the primary endpoint, do a proper power calculation. If your numbers are not enough, call it a pilot study. If you want to do the large number, as per requirement of the power, do a multi-center study across centers in the country or across the various continents. Before you submit, to avoid rejection, you must look into and mention ethical committee clearance, informed consent. You must look into conflict of interest. If it is always a good idea for a trial to be registered online in the clinical trial registration, this really improves the status of your publication manuscript. You must not have disclosure of the identity of the subjects anywhere in your manuscript. And finally, very important, look for any evidence of plagiarism or similarity. Now there are easy way of putting your manuscript online and find out if there's significant plagiarism from earlier published articles, even if it's yours. Before you submit, look at the grammar, the English. It's not a bad idea to take professional help here. Use proper abbreviations, explain the abbreviations. Your references must be latest. Don't miss out the references of the last 2 to 3 years. Very important, how do you choose the journal for submission? If it is a broad-based work, look at a general journal. It can be either a medicine journal or a gastroenterology journal, but don't look for a very focused journal. Whereas if your work is very focused and pointed, then you select a journal that is specific for that particular issue. So these are some of the important journals we always want to publish, but you must know what they're focusing at. It's a good idea to be ambitious and choose a high impact journal for the initial submission. And this is particularly if your manuscript or your work includes randomized controlled trials, particularly multi-center studies. But you must have a backup plan. You must study the scope and the pattern of journal where you are publishing. What are they publishing in the recent time? If your article or results are similar to the one which is published in that journal recently, then don't send it. They would not publish an article with similar results as has been published recently. Choose some other journal. Writing a covering letter to the editor-in-chief is an art. Your aim is to sell your paper to the editor. You have only one shot at it. You must get it right. Great care should be taken to attract the editor's attention and provide a reason for sending your paper for external peer review and not rejecting at the editorial board itself. You must avoid silly or careless mistakes, which I've already talked about. This is a controversial issue. Some of the editors, particularly the modest impact journal, would be happy if you mentioned that the manuscript has been reviewed and rejected by another journal of high, and then attach the reviews and outline what you have done to remedy these weaknesses. This may be very, very useful, but you should be careful. Sometimes it may boomerang. Instant rejection is possible even before an external review is done if the journal is chosen is inappropriate for the work which you have done. As an endoscopy journal editor-in-chief, I often get articles which have nothing to do with endoscopy. Waste of time. If it lacks novelty, unlikely to be proceeded further. If the article is descriptive rather than mechanistic, that may be a decisive factor. If the study design is inappropriate, there may be instant rejection. Question which you address in any study which you want to publish must be an interesting question. So if you give an answer and the editor says, all right, I understand, but so what? Unlikely to be further peer reviewed. And of course, underpowered studies would be rejected very easily. Now, what should you do if your manuscript is rejected? You must plan for the next submission. You must learn from your previous experience. Each rejection will give you some idea how to improve your article. Carefully look at the review comments. I'll talk about it a little later. Update your references. There may be a gap of a couple of months or years before you resubmit. So there may be some articles in that subject which has been published in this time. Please include them in your resubmission and be more realistic this time. Reviewers' response when they ask for changes is very important. Always number your pages. Copy the reviewers' comments and make answer very clearly under subheadings and numbers. Like if there is a reviewer's comment as 1, 2, 3, you reply to each of them in the same order. Highlight the changes in the text and give page numbers. You must answer all their points if you want your article to be accepted. You may need to do good work before you resubmit it. So most of the time, if you refuse to address to the reviewers, your article is likely to be rejected. It is not necessary that you agree to everything which your reviewer said, but if you disagree, give a logic behind it. I think these were some of the important tips which I feel will help you in writing and in publishing. So happy writing and happy publishing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sahu, and congratulations. And thank you for involving me with 3 outstanding talks. I have 1 or 2 comments. First to Dr. Anand and Dr. Ramakrishnan. What is the importance of the title of a study as compared to rest of the study? Should you have a positive title saying that endoscopic mucosal resection removes blah blah blah, or a study of endoscopic mucosal resection, a randomized trial? What is a better way of putting a title?
I personally feel the better way to put the title is which will interest the audience. If you can ask a question and answer, that probably may be a better way of putting a title. But title should be very relevant to the work that has been done. It should not be promising something which has not been done in the paper. So you have the best experience, and I think you can answer that question better.
No, it's always a challenge. I have struggled with what is right. I asked a few outstanding experts, and there was a divide. Once we had a debate on this, and I asked Dr. Analog was of the view it should not be, while Dr. Reynolds and Thomas Boyer, they were in favor of having a clear title, like terlipressin is effective in hepatorenal syndrome, rather than saying a study of terlipressin in patients with hepatorenal syndrome. So I'm still a bit confused, but my own feeling is a positive title is good. It can give you acceptability and rejection both quickly. The second part is about Dr. Goenka also stressed, is about, and you stress very clearly about the possibility of first rejection of a paper. So what is the best way of avoiding a rejection besides being a good study? Good studies are also rejected.
Very true. I mentioned that the forwarding letter should be very clearly written, and it should spell out very clearly why this study is important for the journal in which you are being submitting, and highlight the strengths of the paper as well as what are the positive outcomes in the paper that is going to make an impact on the science.
I agree with you. The cover letter, and you have a Lancet paper, so very outstanding work. I think cover letter, and in my also experience, is a very good section on results. The abstract, every editor just reads the abstract, and rejection or further sending for review just depends on your abstract. So I think results section and downplaying conclusion is a good way. If your conclusion is very strong, sometimes it's challenged, and so I think a strong results, strong statistics and results is very helpful, and I think abstract is the most relevant part of a study.
So respected sir, like of the four, that is introduction, material methods, results and discussion. So where do you think the core or the important thing as far as a paper is considered, sir? So when you are writing the research paper.
We'll take advice of Dr. Anand.
So I personally feel that most important thing is how the paper has been planned, that is material and methods, and what results have been found. These are the two things which are most important. And above that, whether the aim of the paper was very clear or not in the beginning. So these three things are very important. And whether the conclusions are matching with the aim that you started off with, and they are relevant to the subject that you are studying.
I totally agree. I think a good study should define primary endpoint, secondary endpoints clearly, and results must show that in simple form. A simple to read paper is good. So don't repeat your tables into results or repetitive. Secondly, the last paragraph of the introduction should convey the lacuna and the aim of the whole study. I think which is very often missed. The reviewer generally asks, we are not clear why this study has been done. Another area where rejection is imminent, is always there, is your heterogeneous inclusion criteria. So if your inclusion is clear and it is a homogeneous population, whatever study or cohort you have taken, you have a relevant, good chance of getting in. But also the novelty. I think the research question is the key. Simpler the question, more chances of getting this paper in. Like antibiotics in pancreatitis, yes or no?
So the other thing is, sir, whenever we are writing a research paper, introduction, material methods and results go smoothly, sir. So the discussion part sometimes will be a little difficult to collaborate because we are used to writing a thesis paper. So what is the difference between writing a thesis and a research paper? So the discussion.
First, I have to ask him, he's the speaker.
Yes.
Dr. Anand.
Thesis is a little more detailed discussion. In paper, you don't have the luxury of discussing everything that you have found. So you have to choose things very carefully, what you want to discuss in your discussion in the paper. In paper, you first highlight what are the major findings that you are going to highlight and how they correlate with other reports which have been done earlier or similar papers if they have been published earlier. How do they compare with those? And what is the meaning of difference if you have found? This is what I think how the discussion in a paper should be addressed. While in a dissertation, probably you discuss every finding that you have got and discusses along with the review of literature.
Thank you.
One of added strength of the paper can be the first para of your discussion can be a summary of your unique results. Not all the results, just 2 or 3 lines of that, and it should not have much of review of literature. Discussion is, as Dr. Anand says, is discussing the strengths and weaknesses of your results. So start with your strengths to show a good face, and at the end you can say limitations. But don't forget to accept limitations. That will avoid rejection, and it might just come, yes, the authors are aware of it.
Thank you, sir.
Respected sir, actually, it's how to make the discussion more structured actually. And the second point is, it is always required to highlight your points in the starting of the discussion. In many journals, they used to say, don't write this, highlight the points in the starting of the discussion, which is right, and is it used to follow the journal's criteria, or it is always to write the key points in the starting?
Well, there could be some journals which may not like it, but most people would start the first para of the discussion with your own study, the strengths of that study, that this is a randomized trial, small or large, pilot or whatever, and then what has happened in it. But discussion is actually not very important part of the whole paper. Discussion is to support your results or limit your interpretation, both ways. I think the most important part of your study is the design, a very thorough consort diagram, very carefully selected patient population, and very strong statistical analysis. At least when I have an opportunity of reviewing some paper, I would just read the results 2-3 times in the abstract and the research question. But it's sometimes luck and nothing else.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, one more thing is about the bibliography references.
Yeah.
So sometimes the same point has been cited by so many papers. So how to select which reference to put? Because sometimes
I'm struggling with this since last 3 or 4 holidays, because I'm writing a review, and it is so difficult to reject even seminal papers since a new paper has come. So which one to keep, the seminal paper or the review paper, the latest paper? So generally I would keep a latest paper, because the readers would like to read the latest, and also would not say, look, this guy has not written the latest paper. So, but seminal paper should be cited in the review paper, the latest paper, that you kindly ensure, and try to use references. In an original paper, 20 to 25, in a review, 50 to 60, unless they have asked you to have an exhaustive review. My opinion, Dr. Anand can advise more. In an original paper, 25, and a review, 50 to 60.
Good evening, sir. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Chalpati. Very nice lecture, sir. One more thing which I learned is while writing papers, if there are many journals where there are some tutorials for review process that's available for reviewers of the journal. So probably if we go through those tutorials, we'll get the perspective from the reviewers and editors, what they want and how are they reviewing the papers. And probably we can put it into practice when we are writing papers, and that might avoid a lot of things that can modify our ideas. That's what I learned.
Thank you. That is very educative. I didn't know there are tutorials available. Please forward me one of the tutorials.
Yeah, it is available in Elsevier journals for GI endoscopy, sir. How to review a paper, and how to make a constructive comments to the authors, like that.
Yeah, endoscopy journals are far ahead of liver guys. Please send me 1 or 2 of these. I have
Sure, sir.
I would also like to see that.
Sure, sir. Sure.
I'll be grateful if you send me also.
Yeah. Sure, sir. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations and all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi.
Thank you, sir.